Welcome to the Carmelite Quotes podcast, where we share Carmelite wisdom to encourage and inspire. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the life of St. Teresa of Avila and explore her motivations for reforming the Carmelite order. We'll also reflect on the spiritual teachings that emerged from her work, which continue to shape Carmelite spirituality today. So stay with us as we journey together into the heart of Teresa's reform and her love for prayer, sacrifice, and fidelity to Christ. Saint Teresa of Avila lived in a time of significant religious upheaval. And by the time she began her reform, she was deeply troubled by the growing divisions in the Church. In The Way of Perfection, St. Teresa reflects on her decision to establish a new kind of Carmelite community. She writes, "When I began to take the first steps toward founding this monastery, for the reasons given in the book I mentioned that I wrote, and also because of some great favors from the Lord, through which I learned that he would be greatly served in this house, it was not my intention that there be so much external austerity, or that the house have no income. On the contrary, I would have desired the possibility that nothing be lacking. In sum, my intention was the intention of the weak and wretched person that I am, although I did have some good motives besides those involving my own comfort." Here, Teresa speaks with deep humility. She admits that her initial motivations weren't entirely focused on austerity or complete poverty, but rather she sought comfort along with holiness. But as her prayer deepened, so did her understanding of what the Lord was asking of her. Teresa's reform would go beyond personal sanctification to address the needs of the Church in a time of great spiritual crisis. Teresa was particularly concerned about the spread of Protestant reforms. In her own words, Teresa shares how much it distressed her. She writes, "At that time, news reached me of the harm being done in France, and of the havoc caused by those who had turned away from the Church, and how much this miserable sect was growing." Though Teresa was powerless to intervene directly, she offered her deepest prayers for the Church and sought to create a community that could offer support through prayer and sacrifice. She saw her reform as a way of responding to the spiritual crisis by forming a community entirely dedicated to lives of prayer, austerity, and fidelity to the Catholic faith. St. Teresa's determination to establish this reform came from her deep interior convictions, a desire to return her community to a life centered entirely on God. But beyond that, she hoped her reform would inspire others to live lives dedicated to prayer, sacrifice, and fidelity. Now, stay with us as we dive deeper into Teresa's teachings and the key principles that guided her spiritual journey. When we look at Teresa's spirituality, one thing becomes immediately clear. For her, prayer was the foundation of everything. She often described prayer as an intimate conversation with God, a place where the soul opens itself to the one who loves it. Teresa's deep commitment to prayer shaped not only her life, but also her vision for her reform. Closely connected to this is her vision of spiritual growth, beautifully articulated in her work, The Interior Castle. Teresa understood the soul's journey as a gradual progression, like moving through the many rooms of a castle. Each step brings us closer to God, who dwells in the innermost chamber. Teresa saw this journey as one that required both prayer and self-knowledge, leading ultimately to profound union with God. A key part of this spiritual journey is the practice of detachment. For Teresa, true spiritual freedom comes from letting go of anything that holds us back from fully loving God, whether it be material possessions, personal desires, unhealthy relationships, or even attachments to how we think things should be. She knew that when we release these attachments, our hearts become freer to receive God's grace. Humility, too, was foundational in Teresa's teachings. She was very aware of her own limitations, often speaking of herself as a wretched creature. But this humility wasn't about self-pity or putting herself down. It was a simple acknowledgement of the truth that without God, we can do nothing. It's through this humble recognition that we open ourselves up to God's transforming power. And Teresa's life wasn't without suffering. She teaches us that trials are opportunities for growth. Whether it was illness, misunderstandings, or resistance to her reform, she believed that perseverance through difficulties was a way to draw closer to God. Her words, "Let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you," reflect her determined determination and unshakable trust in God's providence. Even as Teresa emphasized personal prayer, she knew the importance of community. Her reform wasn't just about individuals, it was about creating a supportive environment where her sisters could grow together in holiness. She believed that living in simplicity and mutual love would allow her nuns to focus more deeply on God, and she counseled this deep growth to the lay persons in her life. Underlying all of this was her desire to reform religious life itself. Teresa sought to return to the original spirit of the Carmelite rule, a life of poverty, solitude, prayer, and sacrifice. She wanted her community to be free from distractions, where her sisters could devote themselves fully to their spiritual journey. In this way, her reform was about much more than external changes. It was a true renewal of the heart and soul. So now, stay with us for some closing thoughts. As we reflect on these key elements of St. Teresa's teaching, it's clear that her legacy continues to call us to a deeper life of prayer, trust, and love. Even today, her insights offer us a path to follow as we seek to grow closer to God. Thanks for joining us for today's episode. Stay with us as we continue to explore more Carmelite saints in future episodes, and be sure to share this podcast with your friends and followers on social media. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Audible, Amazon, iHeart, and even YouTube. And for more inspiration, be sure to visit our website at carmelitequotes.blog. A special thanks, as always, to Sean Beeson for our music. And as we close, let's consider St. Teresa's own advice. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things pass away. God never changes. Patience obtains everything. Whoever has God finds they lack nothing. God alone is enough. Until next time, blessings from Carmel.